This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 70.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba. Ramsey is really good friends with Inbox Zero. Hope you enjoy the show.
What's up, SE Nation? Thank you all for being here and listening to my voice. For those who don't know me, my name is Ramsey Majaba. I am host of We the Sales Engineers Podcast, and I started this podcast, website, and YouTube channel to be a resource for sales engineers by sales engineers, because I do a lot of interviews, so it's by sales engineers. I want to thank all of those who signed up to the free coaching / consulting / chatting session. I didn't know so many of you were interested in chatting with me, and I really cannot wait to actually talk sales engineering with you. So I'm looking forward to that. For those who signed up yet but didn't actually book a time, make sure you click on the Book Me Now button in the email that you've received. And if you didn't receive an email, you might want to check your spam. So I initially made available only a couple slots a week, but based on the amount of people signing up, it seems that I'm going to have to add more, and I will do that. I just need a little bit of time to figure out when would be the best time slot that I'd be able to talk to you. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about and you feel like you would benefit from chatting with me, head over to wethesalesengineers.com, scroll down to right under the testimonials, and sign up for a coaching session. All right, on to today's guests. Now, question for you guys. Ever wonder what it feels like to be the number one SE for an entire company in a region? What about the entire company? Well, Sam Pena has done both of those. We will talk about what it's like to be a number one SE at a startup, how that has helped his career, and how he has actually helped implement processes and build an SE organization. I look forward to our chat, so here's Sam. Good morning, Sam. How are you doing today?
Good, and yourself?
I am doing very well.
Awesome. Thank you for having me today.
It is my pleasure, and I'm glad we were able to connect because you're in a unique situation, which we will discuss in a bit. But first, can you tell everybody listening about yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone. So my name is Sam Pena. I'm currently the Senior Director Solution Architect here at a company called Pluralsight. And so I am responsible for running two teams. The first team is the East Enterprise team, and the second team is the Public Sector team for Pluralsight.
And okay, Enterprise and Public Sector.
Correct.
All right.
Yep,
I will have more questions about that. How long have you been at Pluralsight?
Yeah, so I've been at Presales now for a little bit over 2.5 years, coming up to my third year, I believe, at the end of this year.
And where were you before?
Yeah, so prior to Pluralsight, I actually came from a startup that was founded by two ex-Facebook engineers. One of them that founded Hadoop. The name of the company was called Interana, based, of course, in Silicon Valley. In California, where I was hired to be the first SC in the East Coast to help build out their sales team out here, and did that for about a year before coming to Pluralsight.
And right now at Pluralsight, you were also the number one SE in the world. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Was that dramatic enough?
Yeah. So it's a funny story. So part of the reason why I joined Pluralsight 2.5 years ago was the fact that it was relatively a young company where it was primarily focused both on sales and customer success, but there was no organization built out yet for pre-sales. So when they were building out the sales team with a new CRO that came in, that I knew the CRO, and he kind of mentioned to me that they're building out this pre-sales team. And so one of the big drivers of me going over to Pluralsight was the fact that, I can come in, relatively brand new into the organization with no pre-sales kind of organizational structure, and being able to help kind of form and build that, what the pre-sales is today, 2 years later.
So how does one manage become the number one SE in the East and also number one SE in a company in the world? What were your qualifications before then?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think part of it qualifies it with networking. So just knowing who, people in the industry and just being kind of connected with people. So I started my career at Deutsche Bank. So I actually didn't come into the SE world until many years later. But during my years at Deutsche Bank, I discovered a company product called Click, which was a BI tool, and I got really, really good at it. To the point where, I used to be references for Click. I used to be use cases for them. I'll speak at some of their forums around the things that we're doing at Deutsche Bank. And then that was kind of my first entry into the SE world, joining Click. And that's kind of where I started to develop my network around kind of the SE community, but more importantly, even the account executives and, sales leadership at Click. And while I was there, I got to meet, various leaders within the various functions, and, created my brand at Click for a couple of years. And then when a lot of those sales leaders started moving to other companies, everyone always looks for people that they worked with in the past that are good and, have great brand awareness and just, good to work with. And so I've been fortunate enough to be tapped in the shoulder a few times to jump to, in Tirana, where I knew a few people there, and then also jumped into Pluralsight, where I knew a few people there as well. So just fortunate, been networking and just kind of knowing people along my career.
Did you have to interview for these jobs, or were you given these jobs?
No, I had an interview. So even though I was tapped into, I still had an interview to the job. And the reason being is because, like you could expect, right? Even though someone knows you and has worked with you in the past, that's only a foot into the door. You still have to kind of interview through, like the co-founder of the company, the head of product. If he's not the head of sales, then whoever the head of sales is, other peers that you might be working with. So like in Toronto, I was interviewing my peers in the West Coast, making sure that, I've done the SE role. I understand the space that I'm going into. And then at Pluralsight, very similar. I flew out to Utah, and I had an interview with multiple different executives, sales leaderships as well. And then ultimately also my boss at the time, which was, he was just running professional services, and he was just starting to build out the pre-sales organization. So, I never worked with him in the past. So I had an interview with him so that, we both understand our strengths and what we can bring to the table as I'm being onboarded.
The reason I was asking is I was listening to a podcast. I think it was Sales Hacker, but I'm not 100% sure, where a CEO was talking about the fact that he hasn't had to interview for a job in the last, 10, 15 years because of networking and connections. And he might have had conversations,
right?
But they weren't formal interviews. They were just getting to know one another type conversation. So it sounds fairly similar, except you had to interview with those who don't know you.
Right.
But connections got you the job.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and it is a good point. I guess the interview that I went through might have not have been as formal as probably you would expect. It wasn't really tell me about your past, tell me everything. It's more around informal interviews around, tell me about yourself, some of your strengths, some of your gaps, but not drilling into anything too specific. And I can tell you now, interviewing at Pluralsight for pre-sales role today is very different than it was when I first started. And I joined at Pluralsight, just because we've added a lot more process into it and being able to articulate if, people are A, done market research around the product, B, can they demo value? That's the big thing that we look for. And then C, how do they handle certain situations throughout their sales cycle? So very different now than it's been when I first joined.
So is adding the process a good thing? Considering you're probably one of the people who made that process, so you're biased.
Absolutely. I was just gonna say. So one of the first things that happened when I joined Pluralsight, since there was no pre-sales, it was a lot of like just trying to figure out like what is pre-sales at Pluralsight? Like, what does it look like? There's always like the most traditional things of pre-sales, right? Like demos, discovery calls, pilots. But in a company where currently a lot of those like core activities are being done by other parts of the organization, like professional services or CSM, it was interesting to figure out the middle ground to a lot of these activities. And so so going back to your original question about the process, it's interesting to add this process because it helps kind of understand where people are in terms of their SE maturity. So as an example, it's one thing to be able to articulate great discovery questions, great way to kind of just interact, right, with one-on-ones. But when we do when we do demos, we actually get to see how it's like for the participants under a little bit of pressure in terms of we usually interview them with a minimum of two directors will be on the call. And we really what we really look for is a couple of things. One is we look for like, how do they position value to the product? So in other words, like what's the problem and why is it that this is the best product out there? We also look for creative ways of how they demo the product. And we don't restrict anyone for a specific product. We don't say, hey, you have to demo Pluralsight. We actually are not biased to that. We say, whatever you're good at, whatever you really are passionate about, we want to see the passion come out of you. Because when it comes to the tool itself, we can always teach you the mechanics on that part, but the passion is always the hard thing to bring out. And then the third thing that we usually try to look for is, we always like to bring in kind of these tough questions that they may not be comfortable with. We're trying to figure out how do they do objection handling throughout the process as well. So yes, I am a bias, but that's hopefully what I'm trying to solve and trying to like understand about someone coming in, so that when they're coming in, they at least have some of the foundations ready to be an SE at Pluralsight.
So let me tell you my experience and why I asked that question. I was interviewing for two different jobs. One had a process, and the other one I was talking directly with the senior director, who seemed to be able to bypass the process, right? With one, I did 2 or 3 conversations with people. That's the non-process one. And the other one that's filled with process, I did like 9 interviews. And because they had to go through the process, they weren't able to give me, like, I started with that interview process a long time before I was approached by a director. And within a month or 2, I was given an offer by the director. The other one, I had done the demo, and they still couldn't give me an offer, or I'm not even sure if they wanted to. But that's not the point. The point is they didn't tell me yes or no, and I had to take a deal. Like, I am currently in that position, and I'm happy that I took it because it's offering a lot of stuff. But the process made it so much slower that they couldn't give me an offer even if they wanted to. So I guess there's pros and cons to everything.
Yeah, and one of the things about, so you're right about the pros and cons of process. I think one thing about when, at least in my personal experience, when I interview with companies, and I did this when I was interviewing in Tirana, I'm pretty upfront with companies I'm interviewing and say like, hey, I'm interviewing with multiple companies. And the reason I do that, I bring it up front, is because I want to set expectation that, I expect to make a decision by a certain point. And the reason I like doing this up front is that if for whatever reason the process falls short of the expectation of when I want to set my date, that I can at least say, hey, like I mentioned before, like you're nowhere near where I need to be in order to make a decision. Like, let's just kind of cut it off from both sides, in terms of like continuing on the process. The reason I like doing it that way is because I'm all about like preserving the relationship. I don't like to not know where I am in the process, but I also don't like to like look like, oh, like I made a decision with someone else and you had no opportunity to kind of counter offer with me in case that was to happen. So I like to be pretty upfront. In terms of our process, so we've learned that lesson in terms of like having really long process. So one of the things that we work on, and we measure pretty heavily around, time to fill, right? So how long does it take us from the time we open a rec to the time we fill a specific rec? What's the timeline it takes to do it? And so one thing that we try to shorten is the actual process of actually interviewing. So we're trying to keep it between 2 to 3 weeks from the first time we interview to making a go no go from both sides of the party.
Okay, so I did that. I set the expectations, which is why I was able to say, "Hey guys, I got an offer. Thank you very much. Do you want to be on my podcast?" So I'm trying to get them on my podcast.
Okay, fair enough.
we hopefully it works out. But yeah, 2-3 weeks from the first interview to decision, it's unheard of, at least for me. So
yeah, and it's not perfect. So there's a couple of one last thing about process and why it's important. I think in my personal experience. So when you're trying to build out an organization, one of the things that we focus on, or I focus a lot on, is around scale. So in order for you to scale business, there's certain process needs to be enforced, right? And so I mentioned, I cover both East and public sector. So I need to make sure that as we're building out both of our teams from both sectors, that we're having consistency in terms of how we're bringing people in, right? In terms of the SEs that are coming on board. And then as you can imagine, that same process being reused both for Central and West as well. So if you look at it from an organizational perspective, there's consistency of how people are being brought in. So that's why I think process is important from my perspective. But circling back to the unheard of 3 weeks. Yeah. So I think one of the fortunate things that we have is that we're still small and nimble from both pre-sales and sales. So from a pre-sales perspective, I think in North America, I think we're maybe 32, including leaders, as of an organization size. So it helps kind of speed up a lot of the coordinations of people and so forth. The other thing is we've made recruiting a priority for us as well. So one of the things that we try to kind of change everything around is for recruiting. So when we have someone that we've kind of identified that might be a rock star, we try to prioritize kind of all other activities to see if we can kind of streamline, especially when we start getting more and more confidence as we go through the different touch points that they're doing. We try to shorten as much as possible. We even done it to the point where we actually start the process now to get a feel for what the OT could look like before we actually go through the entire process. Because a lot of times what we've learned in the past is if you wait to the very end for the OTE, you spend a lot of cycles understanding, who they are, how they interview. You really like them only to find out at the very end that they're out of your price band of what you can actually afford. Yeah. So we've actually forward that to the front of this process to say, hey, this is what the role comp looks like. This is what the expectation is. Is this in line with what you want it to be based off of what you're looking for? Because if it is, great, we want to continue. If not, let's kind of part ways here. Let's not burn cycles on both sides.
Kind of like sales engineering or sales in general. You want to make sure that the customer has budget and is expecting to pay a certain amount of money before.
Yeah, it's hey, you want to do a proof of concept? I'm happy to do it, but you have budget at the end of this proof of concept to pay for it, right? No. So hey, we're going to go through the whole cycle of that.
Yeah. All right. So a quick question for you, hopefully with a quick answer. Which do you prefer? You mentioned that you're okay with the SEs doing demo of whatever they're passionate about. But if they have the option of Pluralsight and something else, is there a preference or whatever they want?
No, so whatever they want. So I'm more around passion than about the mechanics.
All right. And you mentioned CSM, which is Customer Success Management, and SE. Could you just give me a brief overview of the difference between the roles?
Yeah, so here at Pluralsight, we define the SC and the CSM, so Sales Engineer and Customer Success Manager, to drive two types of top line profit for the company. So from an SC perspective, we primarily focus a lot on bringing in new billings to the company. So just so everyone's aware, Pluralsight is a subscription-based company. And so we are, annual subscriptions. So we are constantly trying to drive new subscriptions from our enterprise customers to Pluralsight. The second part where the solution engineers differentiate from the CSMs is that we are also working with the AEs, the account executives, on any deals that touches existing accounts for expansions. So they might have a current subscription, but we might be working on a new part of the organization to be able to expand within that company. And so that will also be part of what SC will be responsible for in supporting that account executive. The CSMs, or the customer success managers, are primarily responsible for the retention side of our business. So it's ensuring that customers that are currently subscribers are utilizing, are adopting, and are embedding the product into their, into the company's culture, into the company's operational systems, and into, the hands of every subscriber that they bought for to be able to leverage Pluralsight.
So I always thought of CSM as post-sales support engineers who are there to make sure the customer knows how to use the product and use it successfully.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And here we also have another arm called professional services that kind of sits horizontal against the customer success and the sales engineer to do a lot of the implementation work on a paid engagement, which is again outside of kind of the adoption and utilization side that I talked about with the CSMs.
Okay, so CSM is not a paid service. It's
correct. It is included as part of your subscription. So if an organization buys Pluralsight, they will get a dedicated CSM to help them with adoption and utilization of the platform.
So in general, not necessarily for Pluralsight, although if you want to talk about that, that's fine. What's the delineation? What's the line between CSM and professional services?
That's a good question. So the line is typically what they're going to pay for. No, but
what the account manager is able to get them to pay for.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the running joke that we get. But in all fairness, what I've seen the line being is professional services is really meant for doing complex implementations, right? So if you need to implement the product with other systems, whether it be single sign-on, whether it be BI tools, etc., that's typically an implementation arm that needs to come in to do a lot of that work, and that's typically a professional services. Any customization that needs above and beyond the standard application that you're currently selling, that's typically professional services, right? Because you're extending the product to what its core capabilities are to do additional things. And so for that, you need to pay additional service to be able to get that.
So what are some of the technical skills that sales engineers have to be part of Pluralsight?
Technical skills. Yeah. So from a technical perspective, there's a couple of things that we, so just a little background first about Pluralsight to be able to answer this. So I mentioned already that Pluralsight is a SaaS company, which is great because that means it's, all based on the cloud. And one of the things that kind of the core area that we focus on is around being a platform for technology skills. And so if you kind of think about the word technology kind of covers a vast majority of topics within the word technology. And so, as a sales engineer at Pluralsight, one of the things that you need to come with is beyond the passion of just loving technology, is really having a good understanding around the various technology domains that a technology company or companies that are moving into being a tech-first company needs to be aware of. So as an example, you have to have a good understanding around software development. And software development, everything from methodologies to framework to certain tooling, right? Whether it be front-end development, back-end development, middleware development. You also have to have a good understanding around IT operations, right? One of the big things that's happening now in kind of the companies, the macro companies, is really migrating to the cloud. And so one of the key things that you have to be acutely aware of is, what does that migration to the cloud look like, right? What are things like, serverless compute? What are things like Kubernetes and containers? The big vendors, like who would they move to the cloud for? Is it AWS, GCP, Azure, et cetera? Beyond those, you also have to have a pretty good interest in data professional. And data professional is everything to do with kind of what's happening with the machine learning and AI space. And then the final piece that we also serve is cybersecurity and information security, right? So being acutely aware around the various ways of how organizations are defending themselves in terms of hackers and attackers.
Okay. So you just mentioned a whole bunch of stuff, from cloud technologies to cloud migration to programming to security to big data. Are you expecting the sales engineer to be an expert in all of these?
No, not an expert in all of these, but familiar with all of these, right? Okay. So one of the things that's unique about us is because we cover all of these different areas in our platform, the audience type varies dramatically. You could be one day in front of having a meeting in front of the CISO of a company and the next day talking to the head of engineering. And we can cover both use cases. And so, and of course, because we also provide enablement on our platform, one of the great selling points that we give to the SEs when we're recruiting SEs is that you have access to all of this enablement through our platform. So you can, come in if you want to learn about, GCP, you can just search GCP and there's hundreds and hundreds of courses and hands-on learning experiences as well as skill sets that you can take.
All right, so you're in a unique situation where you can actually provide training as part of the service you're providing. But for companies like any other company in the world, really, not all of these options are available. So I wanted to talk about that, like how, like I'm a generalist SE. It's kind of the same way as you're talking about your SEs. And I have networking, security, and within networking, there's a billion different protocols that I need to memorize. How do you recommend to your SEs to pick what to study next, what to enable themselves? Because if they decide to do programming and security at the same time, they may not be able to understand any of them.
Yeah, so that's actually something that we thought about a year ago. So one of the things that we again, so going back to the expectation, so we don't expect anyone to be an expert in any one area, right? We want them to still stay in the generalist, but be able to talk vast majority of different topics. And so one of the things that we do, and again, not to kind of go back to the application of Pluralsight, but one of the things that we do here internally is that we've developed kind of an onboarding enablement around various technology topics that we see very relevant with the customers that we're speaking to. And it's called the Technology Big Picture playlist. And in there, it covers areas that are being really like most relevant or top of mind to a lot of the C-levels. And the goal is part of your 90-day ramp up is to go through that and kind of start understanding kind of these main areas that people are really interested in. And then from there, take that foundation and then set your own kind of journey of where you want to continue learning. So whether it be like, hey, I'm really interested in cloud and I learned, the high level around cloud and kind of some of the vendors, and I really want to go deeper into, the cloud world, by all means, you can be that cloud expert, because there will be meetings where we may have to find an SC in our organization that has really good cloud background to bring in to help kind of articulate a lot more of how we align to cloud.
What if all your SEs want to be cloud experts? What happens then?
Yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen. And luckily it hasn't happened yet. So one of the things that we also try to do in part of our hiring strategy is we try to look for people with very wide, diverse backgrounds in terms of their tech backgrounds. So cloud is definitely a hot topic, but we've hired people that come from software development background where they were a software engineer and then they kind of moved into an SE, and so they have that kind of passion for software engineer. I myself came from data, like that was my space, so I'm like super interested in the data space, the big data, MI, AI, and ML space. We've had a couple that came from project management that has nothing to do with the actual technical IT side of technology, but knows how to project manage IT projects, which gives another perspective of how people can come into the organization and think about how you can apply some of this to a project management type of workflow, excuse me.
So if someone's interviewing for the role and they're not familiar with one of these topics or even multiple, is that like a deal breaker, or are you expecting they could learn?
No, yeah. Part of Pluralsight is the fact that we're lifelong learners. So I expect them to learn. So one of the things that's interesting, I had a one of my hires from last year. He came from Microsoft help desk, level one support. Never did an SC role. This is his first SC role joining Pluralsight. And so he never demoed, but he knew Microsoft really well. And so when he demoed to me and my peer, he actually demoed Microsoft Teams, and he tried to compare that to Slack and how this is a much better tool and this is some of the value that you get from there. Right? He loves Microsoft Teams. He's a big Microsoft fan. You can tell that came out of the demo. And since then, we've used that expertise around his Microsoft background to go really deep in Azure and understand Azure really well. Where when we put him in front of customers that are thinking about moving to Azure, he's kind of our resident expert in Azure because he knows everything that's going on in that space because that's his passion. And that's what we want him to get. Like, he didn't know Azure when he came in, but he's focused in because he's such a big Microsoft fan. So that's why it's always fun to see kind of creative ways of like how people come up with some of the demos, and what they come. I have another one recently that did Gmail. So they were positioning against Outlook, and they were like, this is why you should move to Gmail, essentially. Like, the demo was all around Gmail, a consumer product. Like, they didn't even have the enterprise customer, and they just demoed the Gmail stuff. And I was like, wow, that's pretty creative in the way you're trying to position Gmail and why you think Gmail is better than Outlook. Because I can relate to Outlook because I used Outlook for many years, and it was, again, it's just a really refreshing to see how people come up with some creative ways because they're passionate about Gmail or passionate about Microsoft Teams. They use it day in and day out. They believe in the product, and it just like comes out during their demos.
If I ever demo anything to you, I'm probably going to demo Netflix and just put a movie on.
There you go.
We'll watch it.
And talk about why that movie is so great.
Oh, I have to talk about it? Can we just watch it? So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second, and I'm pretty sure a lot of SEs are going to hate me when I say what I'm going to say. So if all your SEs are journalist SEs, what differentiates them from the account managers they're working with?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So one of the big things that differentiates them against the account managers is the fact that they do come from a tech background, right? So I mentioned like some of the audience types that we're talking to, head of engineering, the CISO. So when we come in with the AEs are really talking about feature functions of our platform, right? They're saying like, oh, we have enablement courses, we have skills, we can do these things that we call channels, but that's pretty superficial. When we come in, we're really trying to understand, okay, so tell us about your tech strategy. Tell us about what are some of the initiatives that you're trying to achieve in the next 2 to 3 years, and how are you going to enable your workforce to get there? How are you going to measure them as they're getting there? Then let me tell you how we fit into that picture. So it's without having like that technical background of what specific areas they're going to care about, it's hard for you to align with those like personas that we typically speak with without having a technical background.
So how many SEs do you have compared to account managers?
Oh my God. So it's kind of all over the place, to be honest. Not because of anything bad. It's just the nature of the business. So we do have we have a couple of different business lines that we support. So we have commercial, we have enterprise, and then we have public sector. And in the commercial space, we don't have enough SEs to cover the amount of commercial reps that we have. So that one's a little stretched thin. I can't even think from the top of my mind what the ratio is. The public sector is super underserved from an SE perspective. Like, we're still looking for, we're still hiring to be able to fill out that kind of position that we still need to be able to fill the capacity that we have. In the East Coast, which is kind of one of the most mature SC to AE teams built out, we're probably somewhere about 4 to 5 AE to 1 SE today.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason I brought this up is because you mentioned that account managers are a lot about like feature benefits, and SEs are doing like the actual discovery and talking about it. In my mind, shouldn't the sales guy be able to do that as well? Otherwise, your SEs are going to be not sleeping.
Yeah, so it is something that we're working with. So we have a whole sales enablement part of the team, not in my organization, but in the sales organization that's working to help with some of that in order for them to be able to do a lot of these type of discovery questions that I mentioned. And so we're hoping to kind of get them to where they need to be able to have that. And again, like just going back to not every AE is the same. Like I know I made a general statement about like this is how we kind of differentiate the AEs. There's certain AEs that's been here just as long as I've been, where they've they understand kind of the landscape, they can speak to it. But as you can imagine, in any hyper growth company, when you have a lot of sales that are being hired at the same time,
Yeah.
that information is like in pockets from a discovery perspective. And so it's just working with sales enablement. How do you scale that out to the rest of the sales force?
Well,
So yeah, so a lot of sleepless nights
well,
at times.
the thing is, I've worked with both, and lucky for me, I'm kind of tied to one account manager at a time. But there are some account managers that I've worked with where I had to be there with them at every meeting, which meant I was doing both jobs. But then we kind of worked it out and they picked it up after a while. But now I'm working with an account manager who was an SE for 10 years and now has been the account manager. I don't even have to show up for most of my meetings.
Right.
So yeah, it makes a big difference if you have a account manager who can talk beyond features and benefits.
Yeah, it does. I mean, and I think, I think it's a natural evolution of as you build out an AE organization or a sales organization, that the SE always kind of leads a little bit, just from a technical perspective, just because of their experience and kind of the nature where we are, right? We're in software sales. And so I think that it's an evolution where the AEs will eventually catch up and hopefully we will scale back. But like everything else, right? Everything is fast in today's world. So it's like, how long can you wait before you have to kind of help out where you can?
Yeah, or you can move some of the SEs who want to try out to be AEs to become AEs.
Yeah. So in my past experience, funny you bring that up. So at Click, I had one of my SEs that was interested in moving into an AE, and we actually worked together and the sales manager at the time to transition him into an AE. It took about 6 to 8 months to get him there, because it's not, it's AEs you can find really easily, but not SCs, right? Like it's harder to find. So it's like a slow transition, but yeah, he was, he made the transition. He's been super successful. We still keep in touch. He's currently now at AWS, and he's been crushing it ever since. He loves it. But I've also known SCs where they've gone to AEs and they did it for a year or two, and they were like, "This isn't for me," and they've jumped back to being an SC again. Yeah,
right here.
There you go. Your hands.
Yep, I'm raising my hand. Basically, I think I've told the story before, but my AE got promoted to director, and I did the AE job for 6 months, and oh my lord, it was not fun. At least for me. Cause I didn't. Well, I had a special situation where I didn't have an SE, so I didn't have a technical resources. So I was doing, and we don't have a success team. We had like one FSE, which is a field support engineer for all of Canada. So in most cases, I was doing sales, pre-sales, and post-sales. It was not fun, and yeah, I like being an SE a lot better. So let's just put it that way.
Everyone has their preference, right? It's all what keeps you motivated is what I tell people, right? If you're more motivated as an SE, be an SE. If you're more motivated as an AE, which means you're probably more corn operated, that's kind of like what I'm really trying to say. If you're more corn operated, AE is probably the way to go. If you're more around the technical challenge, stay with the SE route.
So my biggest fear if I ever start doing AE is to go into that feature benefits only path. But I guess that's up to the person as well. Like that's part of the education that they need to teach themselves. So all right, for your SEs, if someone focuses on one thing, right, and then he wants to learn something else, is there a learning plan that they can follow? I think Pluralsight does, in general, I'm not, I don't, I've never used Pluralsight before, but I've seen it. So how does it work?
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, so we do. So we have our own learning plans that we've pushed out based off of various tech domain topics. So we call them paths. So these paths are blueprints that are based off of a specific technical domain. So let's say, as an example, you want to be, just for like argument's sake, let's say you want to be an expert in software development in a specific language, and let's call the language JavaScript. So there's a learning plan, which we call a path, that can help guide you from beginner all the way to an expert level. And it lays out every single part of that specific technology that you're focusing in on. And there's even ways to check along the way to see if you're improving your knowledge of that specific skill.
And for your SEs, by the way, if anybody's hearing noise being picked up by the microphone, I have 2 kids at home who are just running around, and we were talking about this. They're just walking into walls and jumping, so forgive the noise if you hear anything. If you don't hear anything, just forget I said anything. So, I don't know. I can't even remember what my question was about your SEs. If they want to become experts in multiple domains, is that like something that you are okay with? Like, is it possible to become experts in multiple domains? First?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. It's a lot of more commitment on their side, right? Like, I think you brought up a good point, which is like, we support a lot of AEs. We're doing a lot of different activities throughout the sales cycle. So it is a lot of commitment from their part to be able to do a lot of this kind of learning offline, whether it be in between the breaks or over the weekend. It is encouraged. So one of the things that we encourage, and the way we kind of start to develop our own skill set within Pluralsight, is we have our own skills profile. And so these skills profiles kind of determines and gauges how much you know about various different tech domains. So let's say you want to be really interested in machine learning, and you want to be a machine learning engineer, where there are specific skills that are laid out around a machine learning engineer that you can hone in on and focus on to be able to gauge, okay, which part of machine learning engineer should I focus on to reinforce? And so what this helps me do, and the SCs do, is to say, if I want to be a machine learning engineer, like, this is kind of the things that I need to get better at in order for me to strengthen my skill sets on that specific area that I'm focused on. And so we have that for various different other areas, right? So if you want to do cloud, what specifically? Cloud engineering, cloud security, what vendor specific? If you want to do it around software development, which languages, which tools? If you want to go around like methodology, like Agile or Safe or Scrum, same exact kind of way. So we kind of keep it open-ended. What I've seen in my kind of time being here and in the SCs being here, and what I've naturally done, is I've naturally learned based off of the customers that I've worked with, right? So if I see a lot of customers I work with, are really interested, and I'm going to say one that everyone knows, it's kind of the new way now, is moving to the cloud. I've made myself be interested in cloud because of the fact that a lot of the conversations that we're having are around cloud and migration to cloud. And therefore, as a good SC and someone that wants to be able to relate a lot to who I'm talking to and be like a chameleon to them, I focus a lot of my time and effort in learning more about the cloud, what's happening, the state of the cloud, the various vendors, various services, to be able to have that conversation.
And like, there's a saying that people avoid punishment more than they seek pleasure or whatever. I feel like talking to a customer who knows more about something than you do, or being a generalist SE means you're going to be good at some stuff and you're going to know nothing about other stuff.
Right.
Hopefully, you know something you can talk about, like, you know the talking points, but if you get into details, then you're stuck. So you tend to get interested in whatever your customers are talking about most often. Right?
Yep.
So.
Yeah, exactly. For that exact reason, right? You never want to have nothing to say, because that's always weird, right? It's like that weird, like silence of like, oh, so we're doing this. And you're like, oh man, what is that? Like, I got to come up with something clever and I have no idea what to say. You never want to be in that situation. So, but it happens, right? Like, you know, when I first started Pluralsight, I knew very little about the cloud. Like I said, like, I was a data background. Like, that's all. If you put me in front of like a head of data or the chief data officer, like, we can go every various direction around data. If you put me the head of cloud and cloud strategy, I'm like, no idea. I'm like, all great questions. And I usually do my standard. That's a great question. I don't have the answer, but I'll follow up and I'll find the right resource that can help you with that right question. to get the answer, right? Like that was my like default like response. Now I've gotten interested and learned enough to be able to hold that conversation as I've been here for the last couple of years.
I find that customers do not understand or care to understand. It's not their job to understand that we are generalist SEs. So, whenever we go visit a customer, in their mind, we're an expert in everything that they're talking about that we support, right? So, I've developed a good relationship with my customers that they understand I'm an expert in some stuff, have to bring in support for other stuff, mainly because I work with the same customers over and over. We're in Ottawa, it's a small community. So that worked out for me. But if you're visiting a new customer, especially the way you guys work, where you have customer success, we're working on the current customers, and then you are trying to find new customers, that means you're meeting new customers all the time, and it's awkward to explain to customers that you're not an expert in everything that you're talking about.
Yep. And being us that we're like such a general technology platform, like we cover every part of technology. There's always something new that comes out that you just never thought of, right? Or heard of, or just like, like I remember my first time, like GCP in the enterprise, and at least in the East Coast, very far few in between the people adopting the GCP cloud provider. So GCP stands for Google Cloud Compute, a Google Cloud Platform, excuse me, for those of you that don't know what GCP is. Like when I walked in for the very first time, which was a retail company, I walked in and they're like, oh, we're doing GCP and these are the different various we're working with them. And I was like, oh, like you guys are like far from the traditional, vendors that we're seeing out there, like AWS and Azure. Like, oh, okay, like tell me more. Like, I don't know right now how I can help you, but like I gotta do research. But like, please just keep telling me more and more of what you're trying to do, and I'll get back to you.
This is a funny situation. Are you like, do you have to watch what you say about different vendors? Like, do you work with the vendors directly as well, or?
Yeah, so we have partnerships with all three of them. So we have partnership with Azure, with AWS, and with Google Cloud Platform. And so so it's not that we have to watch. We can promote one versus the other, right? We're pretty agnostic because we're partnership with all of them. But what we do try to prescribe is once we know what provider they're going with, and sometimes more than one, we have good kind of conversations and we can bring them in when it's appropriate on how to best leverage their platform, and then how to leverage us to help enable them on how to use those platforms.
Are there platforms, and obviously don't name names, but are there platforms that are easier to use than others, or ones that are like you dread using?
No, I haven't seen that in the market. I've seen a lot of preferences based off of like just past history of the company, right? Like I've seen a lot of older, most established companies using a lot of like the Microsoft stack, because they've primarily been built on that. So it just makes natural sense to continue extending from there. I've seen a lot of the newer companies adopting AWS as being kind of the a newer way of developing business models. And then now with GCP kind of, really making a huge investment, we're beginning to see a lot more adoption in GCP as kind of a hybrid approach, so that they're not just fixed in, here's one cloud provider, I'm only going to bet on Azure, I'm only going to bet AWS, but instead they're going to bet on two, just to have mitigate risk, vendor risk, essentially, between the cloud providers.
Yeah, there are certain situations for me where like I have to integrate with other products from other vendors. I'm like, oh, why are you using that product? Now you're making my job so much harder. And you can't say that. You can't say that to the customer. Like, of course we support it. Like, we will do whatever you guys want. Yeah.
Everything's easy.
Let me go study all night tonight, and I'll come back and fix it for you tomorrow. All right, man. Well, it's like, this has been, I feel like I can talk to you forever. And I say that to a lot of SEs because it's so much fun to talk about SEing. But we need to move on. I am sorry, but we need to move on. So we're going to move on to the not so fire round, which is 4 questions. I'm going to ask them quickly, and you can take your time answering.
Okay.
Question number 1. What do you love about what you do today?
So there's 2 things that I love. So one is I love meeting customers. One of the things that brings me probably the most reward from doing the SE role is helping customers solve complex problems. Like I know it's touche, and a lot of people say that, but it is rewarding. Like just a little bit more about who I am. Like I'm an engineer. Like I had an engineering background in college. I did electrical engineering, right? And so like whenever like I was solving these electrical engineering problems, and I had to outline these like diagrams to solve it, like it was rewarding. It was like, oh man, like I solved this thing by coming up with some creative ways. And I think the reason why I love solving these is because it lets me show my creativity of how the solution gets built. And so that's one really big thing of what I like about doing today. The second thing is I've started as an IC here, and I've kind of transitioned into a leader role being at Pluralsight, which has been kind of for me personally, has been rewarding to kind of transition to leadership. So being in a leadership role now, helping others within both of my teams to develop in certain areas in their SE arts, as I like to call it, has been rewarding as well, right? Being able, I have certain people that reports to me that we focus a lot on face-to-face, and how do we interact with very senior people in an organization because they've never done it before. And so seeing them grow in that process is really rewarding for me as now being a leader of two teams.
So I don't usually comment on these because they're questions for you, but I am. So for your first reason, I used to work in support at Alcatel-Lucent, and it was so much fun to solve problems. Now I work as a sales engineer, and it's so much fun to solve problems and then see the customers look that, hey, oh, you're actually able to solve it. Like it takes it to a different level. And for the second reason you like what you do is you like helping other SEs, which is the same reason I started We the SEs, and the same reason you started something which you haven't plugged yet. I'm not sure why. Do you want to plug something?
Yeah. It's still like, I haven't plugged it. Yeah. So I started a blog. It's my name. It's samuelpena.com. And I haven't plugged it now because I'm trying to be modest. Sometimes I just forget that I do it. It's just something that I started doing recently in the last 2 months. And it's something that I've been, we spoke about this earlier, but it's something that I've been thinking about for probably about more than 12 months, so about a year now, where I've learned a lot. Clearly my career isn't over yet, but I've learned a lot of great experiences in my time already as an SE. And I talk to a lot of people in the community in the SE, and it always seems like we're all asking the same type of questions. We're looking for kind of the same mentorship or same way to address something that's been done before. And so, like you mentioned, like we're all about solving problems. Like I was like, why should we reinvent the wheel when there's so much out there? There's so many people that's done it already, and I've learned so much from a lot of these people that older than me and done the SE longer than me. So anyway, so going back to this whole plug of why you threw it out there. So so samuelpena.com is really just focused on kind of sharing what I've learned so far in my career, best practices, assets that I've built, ways of how I kind of solve certain problems, hiring people, etc. So it's just like a resource for other SEs to be able to leverage as they're trying to go through their own SE career.
Yeah. So there will be a link on the show notes, which is show 70. So we the sales engineers.com/show 70. I've read your posts.
Awesome.
I've enjoyed
Appreciate
them, and I would recommend them. And I feel anybody can actually help anybody else wherever they are in their career. It could be a brand new SE talking about the difficulties of learning something new.
Yeah.
That would help some other wannabe SE who's going to face the same situation, to be prepared for it. So thank you for starting that. I'm happy to see other SEs out there participating, because there's a billion sales blogs, and I think there's like 6 or 7 SE blogs. Ours included.
And it's funny too. Like when I started this, I was like, man, we're so introverts as an SC organization, right? And I know you had Ashka join, I think your last podcast. A couple of weeks ago. So he started SENY, and I've been pretty involved in that community too. And it's funny to see, like, I think there's this perception that we're introverts as an SE, but when we're like all together in the community, we're actually not. Like we're like the most open, like straightforward, loves to collaborate, loves to share. And we do that in our day-to-day within our companies that we work for. like why shouldn't we do it within our community as well to leverage each other?
I feel SEs are more collaborative than most account managers. That's mainly because they have like 50% of their quota or 60, whatever it is. So they're going after that and they don't have time to collaborate. But for SEs, I've had people I've never talked to jump in and do a demo for me while I'm on vacation.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'll help you out. Like, well, wait, who are you? Oh, okay, you're an SE from the West Side. I've never met you in my life. Okay, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good. What would you want to change about your job?
So I think nothing major needs to change in terms of the job, but I think one thing that we're striving for is we're kind of in a new phase of the SC, at least here at Pluralsight, where we've kind of scaled out the SC organization, and now we're trying to figure out where do we gain our efficiencies, like in terms of like how do we do more with less, essentially, right? It doesn't mean that we're not going to hire more people, but how do you kind of keep up with the pace of change? So one thing that we're trying to change, and what I'm trying to change for my team as well as for myself, is like what are some of the low-hanging fruits that we can automate, that we can leverage other tools so that we can focus more on the more strategic tasks and the more strategic activities that we're trying to do. So things like basic demos, right? Like I know it sounds like, oh, you're still doing basic demos, but as a pre-sales organization, we're only 2.5 years old, right? We're only as old as I've been at Pluralsight. So it's been an evolution still. So it's just trying to come up with like, how do we, like the most like RFPs and R5s, right? Like we spend time and time doing that security risk assessments. Like how do we automate some of this stuff to get it off of our plates so that we can focus on the more strategic things? That would be a change.
Have you seen a company called Enablement.com?
Yeah, yep. So I saw them at the SCNY, and I have tried to do an evaluation with them. It's been on me that I haven't started it yet, just because we've been pretty busy. But it's interesting to see what they're working on.
So I had the CEO on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and the way he's worked is like people reach out to him. He goes and grabs a bunch of YouTube videos off their YouTube channel, puts it into his system, and that's it. That's how he evaluates. Like you can, if you reach out to him, I'm sure he'll help you. You don't have to do it yourself.
Appreciate it.
Greg Dickinson at almadim.com. If you check my last couple of show notes ago, I think I have his email. I'll send you his email. Don't worry. All right. I'm not affiliated again.
No, yeah, I totally get it. Yeah.
So, is there a book or resource other than your blog post, other than this podcast, and other than SENY, although they should check it out? Is there a book or resource that every SE should read?
So I've done a lot of different, like I've read a lot of different books around the SE, like just world in general. Like I'm like looking to my right. I know no one can see me, but like I'm looking at like my SE books, and I can tell you like I have like Demonstration to Win, Great Demo, Customer Centric Selling, the Challenger Sale. Like they're all good books that I've read in one point or the other. I have one which is actually next to my desk I just started reading, which was like, I think it's called the Solution Architect Handbook. They're all great books, and they give you different perspectives of kind of like ways of how to do sales engineering. There hasn't been one book where it's like, this is the book that you have to read. What I've learned is that you have to pick and choose kind of throughout all of these different books of what's like how to make sense of it. And the reason why I say that, so I have, this is my last spiel about this whole topic, but I have a colleague of mine that just currently retired as a sales engineer. Tom McKay, he's down in Pennsylvania, probably retired 2 or 3 years ago. And, when he was getting ready to retire, I was able to chat with him a little bit before he went to retirement. And, it was interesting for him to understand how much, not even the SC has changed, but how the buyer has changed throughout the last decade or so, since 40 plus years that he's been in the workforce, where the buyer is actually more informed about the vendor than the vendor is about the buyer.
Yep.
And so like when you read these books, it's like it's all based off of these complex products. and it's all based off of like on-prem and everything. And it's, it's evolved. And so you have to pick and choose the things that make sense to be able to kind of apply to it today.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a book called The Collaborative Sale. The same
Okay.
guy, the same people who wrote Solution Selling.
Okay.
But it's updated. It talks about like how customers are who've done like 56% of their research, who are 50% into their 56% into their sales cycle, and what salespeople should be doing to help that. Like they should be doing marketing. Salespeople
Right.
should be doing marketing. Salespeople, yeah. So that was a good book. It wasn't the
Okay.
best book I've ever read, mainly because I couldn't read it really quickly. There are books where I just start reading and don't stop. This was not one of them, but
Okay.
I was able to complete it and get a lot of information out of it. So
Okay. Awesome. I'll put that on my to-do list on my Kindle
yeah,
right now.
there you go. Last question: what would you recommend, or what advice would you give someone joining your company that doesn't get from anybody else?
So an advice for them joining the company that they wouldn't get anywhere else.
SE specifically, just to make it harder.
Yeah. That's a good question. What's an advice that I can give them that they can only get from Pluralsight? So I think probably one of the I think this is a pretty general advice. So let me think again. Let me see if I can get a very specific one.
You want to talk it through?
Yeah. So I think because what I wanted to kind of say is like I think one of the biggest advice I give, and I give a lot of people that comes into here, and it might be general to other as well, is that we look like we're a pretty established company. Like I think when I talk about our pre-sales organization, it sounds pretty established in terms of like we have process, we have documentation, we have framework. And I think the biggest thing that I tell people when they come to Pluralsight is that don't feel like you're constrained in terms of what's already been built within the pre-sales organization. There's actually a lot of room to grow in terms of both from like an organizational perspective, like developing what the pre-sales organization going to look like in the next 3 years than where we currently are. So a lot of times my biggest advice is we're looking for fresh ideas. We're looking for a new way of thinking in terms of what pre-sales needs to look like for the next 3 years. So don't feel constrained with what you're coming into. Like things can be broken, things can be readapt. And so one of the big things that I focus on a lot, at least in my teams, is not to feel constrained. So unconstrain yourself, right? So if we're doing things that we've done in the past that aren't working, like we want to hear from you, and we want you to be able to take ownership of it and change it and reapply it to the rest of the company to be able to kind of make impact. Because I think one of the big things that I tell people is like, it's one thing to be coin operated and know that, you might be crushing it with your rep and everything. But I think there's another element in the SC is to be able to know that you're making an impact to the rest of the company, whether it be through some global initiative, whether it be through being invited to speak at an internal forum or something. I think my advice would be or kind of more of like what you could expect is to have both, is to be able to, be in the field, but also recognize that you'll have a global impact if you put yourself out there, of course.
Yes, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, basically. I don't know
Exactly.
who said that. I didn't say that. I'm not that smart.
I like it though. You could take it.
No, it's someone famous. If it was someone obscure, I might take it and say it's mine. But this is someone famous that said it, so I'm not gonna take it.
Fair.
So this has been great, man. I do appreciate your time. There is one thing that I've been wanting to ask you. I've never heard of the term corn oriented or corn driven.
Oh, coin driven.
Coin.
Yes.
Coin.
Yeah, coin.
Okay,
coin driven.
I thought someone was hungry, like they're going after food.
No, coin.
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense.
Coin driven.
Okay, all right, good. So that's it for me. Is there a question that you think I should have asked you that I didn't?
No, I mean, I think this was awesome. I really appreciate it. I hope, I think that if there's anything that I hope this will comes out of this, for me personally, is that if it helps one person, like you mentioned earlier in the SC community, like it was worth, the conversation and just giving you a little bit of my insights and what's going on here. So I hope this helps someone.
I'm sure it does. At least they know how to interview for a plural site job if they need to. So that's
Fair enough.
All right,
Awesome.
I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you later.
All right. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Talking to Sam, I got the feeling that you would never be able to tell that he's a director at a company. So unassuming, so down to earth, and so caring for the SE community. Like, that was apparent to me. And I loved how he, in order to hire someone, he needs passion over technology knowledge. Knowing that try to say that 5 times in a row. Knowing that technology can be learned, passion cannot. So, during the course of the conversation, Sam mentioned a lot of books. You can find the links in the show notes at wetheSalesEngineers.com/show70. A reminder to sign up to chat if you find it useful to you at wetheSalesEngineers.com. Scroll down below the testimonials. Thanks again for being here. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.